listening to the carbon debates, I listen carefully for a recognition that incentivizing the maintenance of forests around the world should be the top priority for carbon credits with respect to our industry. The beautiful thing about the industry is it is available throughout the world, and it is available to support communities wherever the forests grow and produce jobs and support those economies. But if there is going to be credit in the carbon market, it has to incentivize the maintenance of those forests wherever they are.
Thanks very much, Anesta. Preston, we heard about this issue of risk sharing. How do you see that playing out? Do you think, the role of government in terms of creating the right framework for risk sharing for business? And is there a role for the NGO community in that type of approach?
Well, I think there must be a role for NGOs in that approach, or it simply won't fly with governments and with communities. We have to find a way to develop long-term carbon sequestration reservoirs that are acceptable to society, and that must include all elements of society. I think it's up to governments to set a framework for how the characterization of those reservoirs is done, how the monitoring of those reservoirs is done, how the actual operation of the CO2 storage is done. And then after some period of time, an appropriate period of time in which a corporate entity like ourselves would be responsible, at some point then, it does need to turn over to be the government's responsibility, because we simply can't guarantee that we will exist for the time periods that are necessary for this CO2 to be stored. So yes, there absolutely is a role for governments to set that framework around what constitutes a safe reservoir for storage. It's up to NGOs to test and question those assumptions and those criteria, and then it's up to business to perform against them.
Is there a sector, I mean, I've been thinking about this issue of risk sharing and then sovereign risk, which Bjorn was talking about this morning. What are the industries that are out there where this issue is being dealt with? The only one I can think of is the nuclear industry, but are there others that have addressed this issue in an effective way?
I think there are other industries. If you look really at any sort of waste disposal industry today, we have similar kinds of issues. The time scales that are involved in disposing of, let's say, heavy metals, waste heavy metals from the electroplating industry or from any other industry that generates them, actually are longer time scales than even nuclear waste. At least nuclear waste has a half-life. Those toxic metals don't. They have to be stored effectively forever. So there are parallels, but I think the issue here is one of scale, the amount of carbon that needs to be managed. There is an issue of toxicity. Carbon dioxide, of course, is a natural component of the environment. It's present everywhere. It's present in this room. And at low enough concentrations, it's not a hazard at all. So I mean, there are similarities, but there are also some significant differences.
Thanks. Toby, you've heard about business solutions and policy options. Where do you see the major contribution that the NGO community can play in both advancing sustainable forest management through the carbon markets, and also this issue of risk sharing in terms of carbon capture and storage liability?
I'm not sure I'll have much to say about the carbon capture and storage, but for the first part of the question, the role of NGOs in moving this forward with forest carbon, is that the... I think what's happened is, having watched the forest carbon debate over the last decade, it's been interesting because it used to be a realm that was that many NGOs did not support in terms of giving crediting to forest-based activities, and that was primarily driven by the fact that many NGO groups wanted to hold industry and government's feet to the fire in terms of switching over from the fossil fuel economy. I think that's changed, and it's changed quite recently with very rapid and strong support by most NGO groups now for forest carbon activities, and especially reducing emissions from deforestation. The reason it has grown, I think, is one, recognition that it's such a key driver that has to be addressed. It's a great way to get to get developing countries to participate and to benefit from the global carbon market. And 3, that it has the potential to generate these very compelling multiple benefits for local communities and biodiversity. I think the challenge and what the NGO groups need to do now is, as the policy moves forward, is to really ensure that we not only have a robust and large market for these types of credits, activities, and projects under REDD, or reducing emissions from deforestation, but also that we maintain integrity from a broader environmental and social perspective, so that indigenous groups and other landholders and forest-dependent people are not displaced from their lands or negatively affected, and similarly that biodiversity benefits. So I think that's going to be an increasing role, and we're seeing it now from civil society and NGOs, to make sure that it's the right sort of framework that not only gives us these carbon benefits, but also the community and biodiversity ones.
Thanks, Toby. Professor Salim, it's Indonesia's, with the conference being held here in Bali, obviously forestry has been a big issue. And I know last week Indonesia announced its view on REDD policy. Just wondering if you wanted to spend a minute or two highlighting Indonesia's policy and its objectives and its advice to the global community about taking REDD forward.
Point 1, we don't have industries much, so that the pollution by industries are insignificant, small. Our biggest problem in CO2 emission is land use change through deforestation. And that's why the key is now how to get land use planning, appropriate planning, and how to prevent deforestation by introducing incentives. The key with deforestation, why does the people deforest? Because they want the land for food production, for earning income. If we can provide similar alternative to that income, then the incentive to cut the trees can be reduced. It's in that, but strangely enough, there is no provision in the UNFCCC that allow for compensation, for reward, if you prevent deforestation. And that's one of the reasons why, together with Papua New Guinea, Costa Rica, and so on, Indonesia proposes this reduction of emission from deforestation. So you take a baseline. If you then deforest in a way that reduces the emission, then it is appropriate that you be compensated and create an incentive to the people to prevent deforestation.
Making the economic value of the tree needs to be improved so that it's not lost.
Yeah, the key actually is more, one is you give the value to the forest, one as a carbon sink. But now we are also working on an idea to provide value for the function of biodiversity to the biological resource. How can we give the biological resource in the forest through additional, through injection of science and technology, raise the value of biological resource so that the forest is not only looked upon as a tree for energy, but also as a tree for habitat, the forest for habitat for biological resource, which are the potentials for medicine, for cosmetic, for horticulture, and for food. The third strategy that we are trying to develop is how can the forest get the reward for being a capture of rain, the catchment area. In the next 20 years, water will be a scarcity factor. So if you have then the forest that still is able to function as a catchment area and therefore preserve water, while water is being declining overall, then that deserves also a reward. So the forest, one, as a carbon sink, second, as the habitat of biological resource for value added, third is as a catchment area. That ABC has a convention on climate change for this carbon sink, convention on biodiversity for this biological resource, and convention on desertification for water catchment area. But B and C has not been developed yet. We are planning also to move in that field.
Any final comment on carbon capture and storage technology? This is something that Indonesia...